Hi everybody. So the number one thing I get from people who ask usually for lessons or for guidance is how do I go from knowing all the theory and being able to play to making music, making jazz. And this is something I think a lot of people struggle with. And to be honest, I think we've all been in a way sold a pup by what Jordan Clemens calls the jazz industrial complex, which is, books and things on theory sell, YouTube channels talking about theory do well on the whole, I'm told. And people know a lot of information, but often they are frustrated in terms of actually being able to put it together to music. And I compare it to like older players I know, and players from some communities such as the Manouche jazz community who often know very little or no theory and yet are able to put it together musically. And I think like some people are so sold on this theory idea that they almost reject the idea that there is anybody who can play jazz without theory. But actually, if you read up on the history, it becomes apparent that a lot of people didn't really know theory in the way that most jazz players do today. And this isn't an anti-theory thing at all. I mean, I know a lot of theory. I use theory all the time. So I don't get that impression about what I'm saying. But I think often what we have here is people who know about jazz but don't actually know jazz. Okay, so advice number one. No more theory books for you, right? So we books are nice. I've got quite a few of them on the shelf behind me. I don't think most of my students need to know any more theory. And I think once you've learned like about chord tones, 2-5-1s, melodic minor scales, maybe things like that, you kind of know all the theory you need to know, and you need to start getting your hands dirty with some actual music. Learning more concept isn't going to help you. However, there is a difference between knowing a theoretical idea. For instance, you might know, for instance, that you can extend chords up to the 13th. On a C minor 7, for instance, we can go up to the 13th on that. The difference between knowing that and being able to play it on the guitar in all positions, That takes physical practice to do that all over the neck and in all keys. And that kind of drill is important, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's not itself music. That's just learning the instrument. You need to learn that in order to be able to know where the notes are. I've noticed in a lot of students that kind of fretboard learning can be skipped out. So this leads us on to number 2, which is, can you do simple? What do I mean by that? Well, one exercise I like to do with a lot of my students is just play the chord tones, by which I mean like even 1, 3, 5, maybe some sevenths, some sixes, but mostly triadic chord tones through, for instance, an F blues. So this kind of thing. And we're going to do 2 chord tones a bar. The 7th there. Or even one per bar. And that's a good way of sort of explaining the time and the changes to the ear. Hopefully you can hear that it's an F blues and I don't need to comp. Other exercises might include the Barry Harris scale outlines. For instance, that kind of stuff, that's very good as well. That's another example of can you do simple. And I think like a lot of people have a lot of concept in their heads that they know about, they know the melodic minor modes, for instance, or whatever, but they can't necessarily do that. And I think that sort of thing in every position is very important. Whatever concept it is you've learnt about, learn it in all positions, all keys, practice it through tunes, and it might take you ages just to apply one concept. I mean, there's practically no concept to play the triadic notes through Autumn Leaves, for instance. I can't sell books based on this. You know, I mean, that's just, I mean, there's some sevenths in there, but it's basically just chord tones, right? You know, you need to practice that in order to be able to play changes. But it isn't itself yet music. But a lot of people can't do that. So if you can't do that, maybe focus on learning those simple bits really well first before worrying about upper extensions and substitutions and things. Okay, number 3, stop trying to improvise. So, yeah, jazz has this kind of long history of being associated with improvisation. Of course, you know, improvisation is an integral part of jazz, and you can't take that away from the music. But on the other hand, improvisation is not unique to jazz. And although some famous people such as Bill Evans might have said jazz is a how, not a what, he was speaking at a time when we were less familiar perhaps with non-Western and early music traditions. So, for instance, in Baroque music, people improvise. We know that Bach improvised. That didn't make him a jazz musician, right? People who improvise Hindustani music or Persian music are not jazz musicians, although they might be able to collaborate with jazz musicians, right? Because we're both improvisers. But that musical language is not jazz. Jazz is a musical language. It's a musical style. And I feel if you are improvising as well, you're usually going to play the things that you have played before. You know, I have a bag, you probably have a bag. Maybe it's not a bag you like very much, but if you're going to improvise over something, that's what's going to come out. So in order to put things into your playing, you need to be a little bit more deliberate about it. So for instance, if I take a 2/5 minor 2/5 pick, something like this, or if I start on the upbeat, 1, got a nice rhythm. We'll talk about rhythm later. This is composed of a rundown, so it was using a C. This is like a Barry Harris thing. We're using a C7 scale. We're going down and then doing down from 1 to flat 7 chromatically, C to B flat, and doing a pivot chord, like Honeysuckle Rose. Going down a scale and using that last note to enclose the third of A7. We go up the chord tones of A7, and then back down again, and then the third and root of D minor. So your job then is to get that into your playing. So obviously you know that there, you learn that there, but then it's like, oh, I need to learn it in a different place. Can I get it resolving to major? So that's minor. Or, okay, do it in this position. Yeah, that's less in my fingers, right? So I have to practice that. And then you might want to think about tunes. So what about the last 8 of Stella by Starlight? It's a series of 2/5s going down. Might have to cut that line a little bit short. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm using a piece of composed material through a chord progression. Can I do it on what is this thing called love? 2, 3, 4. 4. Adding a few notes at the end because it's longer, right? Or you could do it down here. This is for the C chord, or down here. My fingers don't want to do that for some reason. So it takes time, you know, these sorts of exercises to internalize these lines are very useful. However, you might also want to compose things that are more musical. So you might want to compose a chorus over What Is This Thing Called Love, or over Stella by Starlight. Write it out using, for instance, the Barry Harris material or chord scales or whatever your thing is, doesn't matter. The only thing is that it has to sound good to you. And when you're composing, you can make that decision, right? You can say, when I'm messing around with language, even if I'm not writing it down, I still kind of do that. I think like, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. It doesn't sound very good, but if I start on the upbeat, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And that kind of breaks the rule as well, because you're meant to do, the Barry Harris rules on a certain beat and things like that. But I happen to like the way that sounds. So I've made an aesthetic decision. And that aesthetic decision is important because music deals with aesthetics. I don't care what the fashionable people say. I don't care what the Praxis lot, what the Mayday group say or anything else. Music for me is about aesthetics. You play something, you like it, you don't like it. Play things you like, that's an aesthetic decision. And that's actually key to jazz. And I know lots of academics who disagree with that and they're all wrong. The textbooks of the records. This is really terribly important, okay? So a lot of people are terrified of transcription. A lot of people are really scared of transcription because their idea of transcription is like, you sit down and you write out a John Coltrane solo. It's like, no. I mean, people can do that. Fantastic. Good for them. But every day, I hate the term transcription because the root of it implies writing. And there's not necessarily any writing. You can write things down if you like, nothing wrong with that. But actually, it's about the ears and about the instrument and the voice. So, for instance, there's this line that I play all the time on videos, which I got from Wes Montgomery. For some reason, this line has stayed with me. The singing is almost as important as the playing. People get hung up on this thing. This is just a machine. The musical creativity is in here and here, right? And in here. So when you listen to a solo, sing it. Sing it. Just if it's a lick, just sing it. If it's a song, sing it. Working out songs by ear is really important. Doesn't matter whether they're standards, pop tunes, bebop heads, contemporary jazz, although that's harder to sing, but it can be done. Kurt Rosenwinkel sings everything he plays. Jonathan Kreisberg makes people do that in lessons. Singing is so important. It goes back all the way back to the early days of jazz when there was no other way to learn other than listening to people and trying to sing back what they were playing. So sing it, play it, sing it, play it. And an important aspect of this is rhythm. So you might be a bit flat, a bit out of key. I'm sure I am. But I remember when Barry Harris used to sing to us in class, he would sing a line, and a lot of the time it'd be hard to pick out the pitches, but the rhythm was always crystal clear because the rhythm drives everything. For instance, if you think of the Barry Harris added note rules, they're all driven by rhythm, for example. What chromatics you add in where depends on the rhythm of the line. And that example I just did, the 2-5-1 lick, I changed the rhythm because it didn't sit right, and then it sounded better, right? So rhythm is tremendously important, which will bring me on to my next point in a second. But when you're transcribing, don't just worry about the pitches. In fact, if anything, concentrate on the rhythms first, and the pitches might become clearer if you're transcribing some tricky bebop line or something. I've always found that to be the case with Parker and stuff like that. Rhythm is all important. Rhythm is the thing that lifts the music beyond just being chord tones and arpeggios and scales. Most jazz language, when you look at it, it's actually pretty simple. It's just a combination of scales and arpeggios and chord tones, the sort of stuff that you might learn about in a theory book. But what makes it language, what makes it vocabulary, what makes it jazz is usually down to the rhythm. And this is an exercise which lays it all bare. So I'm going to play on an F blues backing track, F. Just the note. I've got to keep it going. This isn't something which you should think about too much. And so on. Go on for as many choruses as you can. If you can't do that, then that's something you need to address. How do you address it? By going back to the next step and listening to the records and copying some rhythms. So, for instance, ba ba doo ba yo ba 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 da ba ba do. Yeah, this is a Wes Montgomery line. Good rhythm. Ba ba the rhythm stands up on its own. It doesn't even need the notes to be hip, right? That's the important thing about jazz language. It doesn't need the notes to be hip. For instance, ba-da-ba-ba-boom, ba-da-ba-da-boom, ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba-doo-boom, ba-da-ba-ba-bum, ba-da-ba-dee-ba-da-bum, ba-da-ba-dee-ba-da-ba-ba-doo-boom, ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-doo-ba-doo-ba-boom, ba-boom. I mean, I might be scatting it in a really derpy way, but that rhythm is cool. Those rhythms are all really strong before you even hang notes on. And this is, people like Parker and Sonny Rollins were all about this. Dizzy Gillespie had a famous quote, which was like, fill your bar with rhythm and then hang notes on it, which is exactly the opposite to how we teach it today. We teach, the notes are important, and then you can come up with the rhythm. Oh, you got a chord scale, now you can come up with the rhythm. No, think about the rhythms first. And hopefully it sounds like jazz, right? Just using chord tones. But that rhythm has to be in your blood, at least a bit. I'm not the most rhythmic person in the world. I don't have the best time. But it's, I think, something that a lot of people struggle with on a basic level. So you've just got to absorb those rhythms intuitively by listening to them and singing them full. As I say, it's not a quick fix. It's a pathway that you walk towards your goal. It's going to take you a long time to absorb this stuff. But it's not something that can be learnt through book learning. You have to get this stuff into your soul, into your blood. And that's the only way to do it. Anyway, hope you find it helpful. Good luck. Post any comments below.